Let's take a look at the process for creating new 3D camera views as well as rendering scenes. To begin with, let's look at our default 3D view that we've dealt with most of the class. This is not the view that you want to render for the exterior. The reason is it's not a realistic view of the house. It's what we would call an isometric view. We instead want a perspective view because as things get further away from our eyes, they look smaller, and that's how we want our camera to appear as well. So I'm going to return to the first floor plan, and to create a camera, we're going to go up to the default 3D view button on the quick access toolbar, click the drop down arrow next to it, and choose the camera button. With the camera button, you're basically going to pretend like you're standing somewhere. So let's say I want to start from this angle over here. I'm going to be standing here taking a picture, so I'll click here. And then you want to show how far the camera view is going to go. I don't want to stop into the house because then I won't get a full view of the house. So you just basically want to go all the way past your house. As soon as I click that second point, it opens up my 3D view. And you can resize the view with the crop region buttons around the side. You can also hold the shift key and use your middle mouse button to orbit to change the angle until you're happy with the view. Once you're happy with the view, then you can go ahead and create a rendering. So to render a scene, we're going to come down to the bottom view toolbar here and click on the little teapot. This is our rendering dialog. Opens up over here on the left side of the screen. You may have a different option for the actual rendering engine. This is based just on the video card that's in your computer. And depending on the type of view that I'm going to create, I'm going to set my lighting up. So right now I'm on the exterior. I'm going to choose the sun only. And I usually recommend that you start one out on draft just to make sure things look okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the render button. The draft, as you'll see, is not a very good looking rendering, but it lets me see if my camera looks good, if the materials are going to look okay, and if my lighting is going to look okay without taking a long time to do so. So looks like it's going to work out okay, so I'm going to go to the high quality and click render again. Now this one might take a little bit longer, so I'm going to jump ahead in the video here. And there's my final high quality rendering. Now you can actually go much higher quality by choosing the printer option. This takes typically a lot longer, so we're not going to worry about that on this particular project. If you want, you can do a higher quality, but I'm okay with just the high quality screen resolution. And then once you've got your scene rendered, you are going to click the button here to save the project. And then you can give it a name, so I'll call this one exterior. Click OK. And then I can close this rendering dialog. So I lose the rendering here, but if you look at your project browser, you now have a rendering category. And there's my exterior rendering that I can jump to at any point in time and eventually put on a sheet as well. So a couple other things to take into account when you're creating renderings. In this particular house, there is a kitchen that would make a pretty good rendering. The issue with the kitchen, though, is that it does not have much for lighting. So I can see there's no light fixtures on the ceiling. If I render this, the only light I'm going to get is coming from these windows, so it might end up appearing pretty dim. So the point there is, if you have some views that you want to render, make sure you put some lighting in there. If I go to the second floor, I've got this office in here. I'm going to create a camera in here as well, looking at the office. And then once more, holding the shift key, I'll press down my mouse button and I can play around with this until I like the view. You can see that I've got some lights up there in the ceiling, so I anticipate a pretty good rendering on this one. I have rotated myself outside the room, so now I'm back in, and again you can adjust the cropping range as well when you do this. And I can decide if I actually want the ceiling to be in there as well. So now when I render the inside, again I'm going to hit the teapot. The big difference here is I'm going to change my lighting scheme to interior sun and artificial. That way I get the light through any windows as well as these artificial lights in here. And once more I'm going to choose to render it as a draft to see if things look alright, to see if the lighting is working okay. The outside rendering went pretty fast because there was just one light, the sun. As soon as you add in more lights, there's a lot more reflections and it can take a lot more time. So again, not a fantastic looking view. Reflections are a little weird, but it gives me the idea that materials are looking good, the lighting's looking good. I'm ready to go ahead and render it on a higher quality. So I'll choose high and render. Now this might take a little bit, so I'm going to jump forward in the video to the completed version. Okay, so here we are, the last few seconds of the rendering. Looks like I'm at about 7 minutes and 15 seconds into this rendering, so obviously a lot longer than the exterior rendering. Again, that's because I have several interior lights and lots of reflections. As this one finishes up, I want to give you a couple of tips on rendering. And one of them is when you get your view finished, if it's maybe a little darker than you would like, I'm actually pretty happy with this one, but it does happen, especially if you have less lighting, where you render and everything went okay, but it just looks a little dim. What you can do is over here in the rendering dialog box, you can choose adjust exposure. And then the only one I usually play around with in here is the brighter, darker exposure value. And I will say that a little bit goes a long way. If I just drag it a little bit towards brighter and hit apply, I can see the changes in here. So you can tweak those a little bit. You can try some of the other ones as well, but I've usually found the most success playing with that exposure value. So I'll go ahead and click OK to that. The other thing that I want to point out too is that one of the things that makes a rendering take a long time is when I turn on artificial lights, it actually turns on every artificial light and calculates all the shadows and all the reflections for every artificial light in this project. So if you do have several lights in your project, one way you can speed up your rendering time is to click on artificial lights here. And this will give you a list of all the lights in your building, and you can figure out which ones are actually in this scene and only turn those on. So how can I tell which ones are in this scene? If I come out in the scene and click on the lights, then I'll be able to see their mark number in the properties panel out here, and I'll know which ones I want to keep turned on. So I've got 13 lights in here. That's partly why it took so long. I really probably only had 3 or 4 actually in this view, so I could have saved some time if I would have done that first. But yeah, go ahead and click OK. As with before, I'll save the project, give it a name. I'll call this one Office. Also, if you want to save outside of Revit so that maybe you can share images with other people, then you can choose the Export button. And when you export, then it will create a JPEG file or a TIFF or bitmap and save it outside of Revit. That way you've got an image file that you can post online or share with other people. So again, that's just a quick look at the rendering tools available to us in Autodesk Revit.